Hello, and welcome to Stories from the View, a podcast from the Pleasant View Senior Center in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts. On this podcast, we invite East Longmeadow residents to tell us stories about their lives and events. And today's guest is Patrick Keough, who has been coming here for the Senior Center for many years and was a firefighter for the city of Springfield for 40 years. So welcome, Mr. Keough.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay. So before we started recording here, you were saying that you were a firefighter in Springfield for a good number of years.
Yes.
And that your sons were also firefighters.
Yes. And the three of us now have been retired.
Okay, yeah. So all three of you. And you said that you're 96 years old?
Yes.
All right. How wonderful. How wonderful. So tell us your story.
Okay. I was born in March of the year 1927 in Mercy Hospital on Keough Street in Springfield. Mm-hmm. My mother and father immigrated from Ireland. They arrived here on January 1st, 1927. And I was born on March 1927. Mm-hmm. So my mother was 6 months pregnant when she came over. And of course, like she said, as soon as that ship left the harbor and started to move back and forth, I said, where's the sick bay? And so that's where she went and spent the whole trip. And then my father and mother was on the ship with the rest of the family. And so that would bring up, let's see where the rest of the family was. It had his wife, his mother, my aunts, Mary, Hannah, and Eileen, my uncles, Dave and Michael. And so they arrived in New York. And the funny part of it was they were supposed to go and stop in Boston. Mm-hmm. And all our relatives that were from the United States was in Boston waiting for them. And so when they got near Boston, there was a problem in Boston in the bay where you would pull in to anchor or to join up to a dock, so that they had to go into New York. So they got off in New York, and they had to wait there while the whole family got in the cars and drove all the way to New York. And then they all got together, and they headed back into Springfield. And they brought the whole family to Murray Hill Avenue, and that's was 2 or 3 streets up from Main Street. So you can see that at the time, Springfield wasn't too built up. And so that they were there for several years until they decided that they were, and that's where the Jewish that's where the Irish all assembled, and it was just up from like Main Street. And then later on, as they started to move up, they finally moved up until they got to Hungry Hill. And that's where most of them bought houses and occupied that space. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about Hungry Hill, everybody says, oh, you grew up on Hungry Hill? I said, yes. And they said, oh, wow. And so let's see what else we have here. And we later moved to Nursery Street. And I can remember Nursery Street because right next door, there was a rag man, and he had a horse. And he lived right next door. And you could hear the horse moving around and making noises. And so it was just a nice place to live or get started as a young person. And so then then later on, my father and mother moved to a house at 923 Liberty Street, Hungry Hill. And later on, they moved, they stayed there for their entire lives. And my father went first, and then later on, my mother did. But it was great. It was a wonderful time living on Hungry Hill. You know, it was all Irish, and one of the spots was the Bottle Park, where Keough and Liberty Street crossed each other, and it was like a night that all kinds of things went on there. There were people there getting crowded around, and then somebody would bring a portable recording device, and they'd play records, and people would dance and everything. Oh God, it was a wonderful spot. And so then from there, my mother used to play an Irish accordion, and an Irish accordion only has 10 buttons. And so what it is you push in, you get one note, and you pull out, and you get another note. And so she used to play that all the time, so I began playing around with it too. And I wasn't good, but I could play the one song that she knew. And so it was great. So then, of course, I went to schools. And so, let's see, I went to, first I went to the Lady of Hope. That was in elementary schools. I went to Lady of Hope. And then I went to the one on the church that was there had a church school. And so I went there for a while. And then finally I went to Liberty School on Keough Street in Springfield. And then from there I went to my junior high school up on Keough Street. And so I went there, and I graduated from there. But while I was there, I had an interesting time because when we were let on vacations, at that time, I used to go to the tobacco farms. And so my brother and myself, we were old enough so we could go. And what we would do is we would walk from Liberty Street all the way down to where one of the main streets was, and we would meet a truck there. And we'd get on the truck, and the truck would drive us out into Connecticut, and we would hit one of the farms there, and we would pick tobacco.
So that was like your summer job or your vacation
That was
job?
my vacation job, and my mother would come with us. And what would happen was we would go down to where Liberty Street ends, and there was a big building there, and I think it later became a boys' club. And we would wait there and would sit on the steps, and finally the truck would pull up, and the guy would take a ladder out, and he put the ladder in the back, and then we'd all climb up the ladder and get in the seat. And so my mother came with us, and then she'd climb up the ladder and sit on the truck, and the truck would bring us to the farm. And
Did
then
other people bring their mothers?
No, I think she was about the only one.
mom.
But there are some girls, because there were a lot of girls too that were coming along to pick the leaves, the tobacco leaves.
Yeah.
And so we would all climb up on the truck, and then we would drive off, and then he would drop all of us off at the fields, and then he would take my mother and some of the girls over to the barns, and they would work in the barns. And what was going on was we would pick tobacco leaves. And there's two ways now of taking care of this tobacco. When you drive by and you see the nets over all the tobacco, that means that's the fancy stuff.
Oh.
And what they would do with that was one of the places that, like the final roll on a cigar, it would have the fancy leaf. And then they had the stuff that was put into the barns, and that's where the women would get like a 3-foot piece of like lath. It was a small little piece of a wood, and then it had a cord, and with the needle on one end, and they would sew the leaves all the way along, and then tie it up in the end. And so then they would take it and they would hang it up in the barn and let it dry off. And of course, you had a huge leaf for tobacco. And then as it grew drier, it would start to curl up. And then when they did, what they did later was they had some of the men back in there, and it would take all the laths down, and they would put them on a rack, and then it would squeeze the whole thing together, take the cord and wrap it around it, and then throw it in a box. And that's how they would take that out. And that was the tobacco that was generally wrapped around the final process or the final product. And God, we really had a great time there. I mean, it was work and it was hard because we'd be out in the field bending over and snapping off the leaves. And then we had a cloth box, and we would cut the leaves off and put them in. And we had to be careful because they didn't want us breaking the leaves or tearing it. And then when we had it filled, we would bring it to the end of the row, and they'd give us another barrel, and we'd go in and we finished the row until we finished it. And then we would get our box there and go over to another row and start until it was finished. And so that would be in a process. And it was work. It was work, and it was hard.
And so how many hours a day would you work?
I would say about 6.
Yeah.
Because by the time we got into the truck and drove over to there, and by the time we got off the truck and they took us to the field, it would be at least, like I say, it would probably be around 9:30 or so. Mm-hmm. And then I would say it would. They could only work us for so long because we were all young.
Right.
We were all kids. There were no adults with us except, like I say, some of the ladies were older than the girls, and they were probably married or so forth. But they were my mother and only 1 or 2 elderly women, and then maybe 5 young girls. And then there was probably maybe 10 or 12 guys.
Nice.
Yes, it was. And we'd be going along, and then, people would be talking, and some people would be singing. And, it was just the trip over was very good. But on the trip back, everybody was sitting there. Nobody was doing any talking.
You were tired.
We were all tired.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And do you remember how much money that you made?
I don't remember, but it was money. And I knew that some of it was paper money. And what we would do, myself and my brother Tommy, we'd turn the money in, and then my mother would give us some of it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And God, it was good, and we enjoyed it. And like I say, we were making money.
And you were supporting the household too.
No, yes.
You were helping out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, my
Were
father.
you in high school, or do you think?
Yeah, I was in high school.
So like 14, 15.
Right. And like I say, there was a lot of boys there. They'd have maybe 15 or maybe 20 sometimes. It'd be how many kids would show up. Yep.
You were day laborers.
That's it. Day
Now,
laborers.
Eric's in human resources, so we won't get into the labor law. for this.
Well,
yes.
this was a long time ago
Yeah,
too, and
Yeah.
and,
So that was it. And that went along until, like I say, as we grew older, and I went to high school, and I went to Tech, and I graduated from Tech. And then, of course, the war was on. And so I was like 17 when I graduated from high school. And so when we graduated, there were a lot of the kids there that said, well, so long, we'll see you. We've joined the Army, or we joined the Navy or the Marines. And they were all going to training places. And so I was too young. And so while I was there, I was talking to some of the people that were recruiting us. And there were a couple of them that were from like the Air Force. And I said, I want to get into an aircraft carrier. I want to get on an aircraft carrier because I make model airplanes, and I just love airplanes, and I want to get that. And they said, okay, we'll put that down. And they did. They put it down on the list and everything. And so then I had to wait. And so while I was talking to one of the recruiters, he says, if you want to get on an aircraft carrier, why don't you look around and get some school or somewhere where you could get some training and training on airplanes, whether it's the engines or the framework or what it is, but see if you could get a job on there. If you're that interested, this is what you should try to do. And I said, okay. So as soon as I got home, I started looking around. And finally, I found, I used to go a lot of times to the drugstore where they had all the magazines, and I'd look around, and there were some of them, you would see airplanes on the cover, and as soon as they did, I would just take it off and started looking. And then finally I saw one, Roosevelt Aviation School. And I said, oh, great. I wrote everything down, and I went home and sent a mail to him, asking for information. And so it came back, and so I told my mother and father and everything, and they said, the price is right, we'll pay, and we can go. And I said, okay. So then my aunt came up from Boston, and she loved to drive, and she says, put my father and my mother and myself and her in the car, and she drove from Springfield to Roosevelt Aviation School in Mineola, Long Island, New York. And so then I was staying in a house that had a large upstairs, and there were like 4 of us, all fellas, and we all were staying there. To the whole school took care of us for the time and educated us so that when we left, we had the thing that we had been trained for, aviation mechanics, and mostly the engine. And so I was there for like, I think it was 6 months. Must have been 6 months. I know it wasn't a year, because I was never there during the winter. And so when I left there, I was an aircraft engine mechanic. And so then when I got back to Springfield, I joined the Navy. And there again, they said, well, you're going to be home for a while because all our training facilities are jammed. And so you're going to have to wait your turn. So I did. So then while I was waiting, I just went to my father's tailor shop, and my father was a tailor, and he had opened a shop in Springfield. And I went there, and my father said, well, while you're here, you're an aircraft engine mechanic, but you may as well be something of a tailor. And so he taught me. And so what I used to do was when some men bought pants, they would put them on, and my father had like a little elevator place, mainly for women, but he'd get the guys up there and he'd put the pants on, and then he'd bring it down to where the cuff should be, and then he'd mark it. And then later on he taught me, and so I would get the pants, I would find the mark, and I would turn over, and then I would measure down and then cut it off, and then I would fold it up and baste it, and then I would sew it on the machine. Yep. And
good man, you learned how to hem.
Yeah. and oh my God, when I got married and everything, I made all the drapes and all the curtains for the house. Yep.
Excellent. You're a Renaissance man.
Oh God, yeah.
Do it all.
I know it when you hear all the things I've done.
And fix the mechanical stuff. I love it.
Yes. Yep. And so anyhow, then, like I say, so then while I was home and I was working with my father, eventually things slowed down with the tailoring because I got to be fast. And he would give me 2 or 3 pantses, and quite in 20 minutes I'd have finished it. And so I found out there wasn't enough work there. So I used to go down to City Hall, and there was some waste in there. I could go in and say, I'm somebody looking for a job. And they'd say, okay. And they'd say, okay, here, go. And so I went to an awful lot of places. Let's see. Oh, God. I wrote them down here so I would remember them, and now I can't remember them.
Don't you worry about
Well, I'm
that.
96. I got to have something wrong with me. Yeah. Well, now I'm getting to this. So anyhow, let's skip that. And so I was back, and then, like I say, I had been playing that accordion with in my mother's house and everything. And so when I got from training, they put me going to a place in Virginia, and they taught me how to work a Mark V gun director. And what happened was that my eyes were so good that I couldn't go on the aircraft carrier. They put me on a light cruiser, and I was a gun pointer. I pointed the guns and then pulled the trigger that the guns fired.
And this is in the Navy?
In the Navy.
Great.
Yes. And so I went there, and I was there for about 6 months, and finally they said, okay, you're going to be on a Mark V gun director. So then when I went from there, they assigned me to the USS Juno, CL-119. That was a light cruiser. And so they had gun pointers on 4 spots on the ship, 2 up front and 2 in back. Back, I'm supposed to say aft, you know.
Yeah, bow and stern, right?
Yeah, or stern, yes. And so anyhow, I was on the front one. And what I had control of was 2 quad 40s. And I don't know if you've probably seen them in the movies. They're the ones that were going boom, 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 and the barrels were going back and forth. That's a quad 40, and I had 2 of them. And so then we went for a lot of training, and we went to the Caribbean, and we stayed there, and we were there a month, and we were just doing nothing but firing. And we had times when they brought the airplane over. I was pulling a panel that we had, because they didn't want us shooting at the airplanes. They wanted us shooting at the targets, and they bring it by. And of course, the Mark V gun director, you got in it and you got a strap there, and then you got something like this, and you put your face there, and there was a little screen there, and then there was like a little round circle. And as you moved, that round circle would move. And so the idea was when the airplane came by, and actually when it was towing the target, you didn't want to aim at the airplane. You wanted to aim at the target. And that's what you would do. And as soon as you got the target, what would happen is they had a chief officer there, and he says, as soon as you get it in your sights, commence firing. I said, okay. And as soon as it did, and I commenced firing, I'd squeeze the trigger, and the guns would start shooting. And what would happen was we were shooting so many bullets or things at the target that in 2 or 3 passes, the target was just gone. You know, just the end of the rope with some just crumb and stuff at the end of it, like a little torn flag. And so then, like I say, they figured, well, okay, after we've done that 2 or 3 times, we're pretty well done. And of course, then the war was going on. But so then, like I say, so then they stationed us in New York. And when they stationed us in New York, since I was a gun pointer, I mean, they didn't need me because, I wasn't a mechanic, or I wasn't a cleaner, or I wasn't doing this. And so they say, well, you could go on Liberty from 9 o'clock, but you got to be back by 11. And I'd say, okay, and I had a lot of time off. And so what I was doing, I would go down to 2nd Avenue in New York. Oh, and what I forgot to tell you was that when my mother and father came to the commissioning of the ship, my mother bought me another little accordion. And so I had it on the ship while we went all over, down to all the islands in the Caribbean and everything. And so I used to get alone by myself. I'd go to the stern and I'd play, because when I played in the where we were sleeping, everybody was getting mad as hell.
They didn't appreciate your
they did. I wasn't good at the time either. And so anyhow, I used to go to the stern of the ship, and there was a place that I could get down under, and I'd play. And then when I'd be on Liberty, I would go to 2nd Avenue, and I would walk into the bars that's there, and almost every Irish bar that was there, they had an Irish band. Mm-hmm. And I'd listen and I'd say, oh, God, then I'd go back and I'd try to play it with my old accordion. So then finally I was talking to one of the band leaders there, and I said, I've got an accordion in the ship. And he said, for Christ's sakes, bring it. And he says, we'll teach you. And so I got it, come off at the ship with my accordion, go over into the bar, and go up with the band, and I'd sit in the back. And I would listening, and I had heard of all the bands for so long. I knew most of the songs, and I had even tried to play them myself. But it's great when you go in and you've got a guitar, a banjo player or a guitar player, and you've got a beat, and you boom, 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 boom. And I said, "Oh, great!" And I went in and I began playing. And God, to be honest with you, after a while, I could play pretty well. Yeah, and some of the guys used to say, "Hey, come back, be sure you come back." Yeah, and so then when I got off the ship and the war was over, I was in New York, and that's where they discharged us. And then I got a telephone call from my mother, and she says, "Hey, you're being discharged?" I said, "Yes." They said that I'm leaving tomorrow. And they said, well, when you leave, go down to this spot in New York, and you'll pick up a brand new accordion. I just bought you one.
Huh.
And so that's what I did. I got on I got down. I had money, so I took a cab, and he dropped me off, and I went up to the man that made the accordions. This was handmade. And he gave me an accordion, and I pulled it out, and it was black, and it had my name on it.
Wow.
Yeah, Patrick J. Keough.
Wow.
Yeah. I said, wow, all little diamonds, And then it had this usual 10 buttons, but it also had 4 more on the inside. And he said, that isn't the way they make Irish accordions. But he said, you're young enough so that when you play, you can play into those 5 keys there. And you can play music that Irish accordion players can't play. And so I said, oh, good. And so anyhow, I began playing. And after a while, I could play pretty good. And so then my mother, she went to my grandmother and said, could you get Patrick into your son's band? And he was my uncle, of course. And so all of a sudden, Dave stopped in at my house. He said, oh, Pat, he says, you got your accordion? I said, yes. He says, I'll come down to the band. We're putting you in the band, but you're going to have to sit in the back. I said, okay. And so I went and I started playing in the band. And I played there for a year or more. And by then I was a pretty darn good player. So then I used to get calls for people saying, we're having a party. Could you come over and play? And I said, oh, sure. But the only trouble is that in an Irish accordion, you play the front keys, but you don't play the back keys, but you're too moving. If you have your hand there and just move them on and off, to keep up the rhythm, it would be fine. But you're moving back and forth, and you don't see too many of them that play the bass keys. And so anyhow, so I would be playing, and I said, I better get some more guys. And when I was playing with Dave, my uncle, in his band, I was really enjoying, having the rhythm, boom, 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 boom. So I met this guy, and his name was Frank O'Neill, and he played the piano. And he liked Irish music, and he was looking to play for somebody. I had heard that, so I called him, and he came and he began playing with me. And then he said, we need a little more rhythm. And we met this gentleman, and his name was Marty Goldberg, and he was Jewish.
I was going to say, it didn't sound like a...
Doesn't sound like an Irish name.
Yes, and so I had Frank O'Neill and Marty Goldman in my band, and he joined the band, and he just loved the beat and everything. And And so we began playing every place, and God, we played every place. I played at, well, first I started because Dave left the, where we were generally playing for the Irish American Club. And it was at the Coolidge Hotel in North Main Street in Springfield. There was a big hotel down there. And so we used to play there. And I remember, too, that we would have to start quitting at about 11:30 because the people in the hotel were getting mad because we were making so much noise that they couldn't sleep.
Yeah, sure.
So then all of a sudden we were leaving 11:30 one time, and my Uncle Dave says, "Hey, you want to come and play another place for a while?" I says, "You mean now?" He said, "Yes." He said, "We can play from now up until 1 o'clock in Wilbraham. And I know some people at Sullivan's Auto Inn." And so I got in my car, and he got in his, and I took a few more of the guys, and we went up to Sullivan's Auto Inn, and we played there like from about 11:30 till like as long as we could go until the cops came.
Those crazy road
Yeah. And what it was the people in had the rooms there. It was a rooming house. You know, it was the Sullivan's Auto Inn, and there were cars parked there and people going in and getting rooms for the night and so forth. And so we had to start then. We still had to stop. It was like the Hotel Coolidge, because the same thing happened to us at the Coolidge. And so what we would do was the Coolidge, we'd play until like 11:30, and then we'd get in the cop and we'd race like hell out to Wilbraham, and we played there until about 1 o'clock, and that's when we had to quit.
Same theme here.
Yeah.
Yep. And so that was what and then of course too, there were always people calling up saying, "I've got a party, could you come and play?" And I said, "Sure. Do you want like a piano player or something?" She said, "Oh no, just you." And so I say, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they would have somebody call up and say, "Oh, Mr. Keough, my daughter's having a shower. She's getting married, and so we'd like to have you come and play the accordion." I said, "Oh, God, when is it?" And she told me, and I said, "I'm sorry, but I'm booked for it, and I can't do it."
So you were essentially a professional musician.
Yes, yeah. And so then all of a sudden, I would call when they called up, because I didn't like playing at showers, for lady showers anyhow, because I'm there with 25, 35 women, and there's always some girls coming over and saying, "Oh, can you show me how to play the accordion?" You know, and all this.
And this was a problem for you?
At the time, at the beginning, it was a problem. It was a problem. Yeah, and so. So anyhow, like I say, I'd say, "I'm sorry, I'm booked for that date." And they'd say, "Oh my God, yeah, okay, thank you." And then the next day, my mother would say, "Oh, Pat, I've got a piano music for you. You're playing
Somebody's shower
next Sunday." Yeah, and I say, "Oh, Ma, yeah." And she said, "Well, the woman called, and so I told her you'll do it." And so.
We love our moms.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Well, she was a real influence in your musical career.
Oh, yes. Yep. And like I say, she still played that one tune, but she didn't know it. Didn't know what the name of it was. Yep. And so, like I say, so that went on. And so anyhow, I was playing in Sullivan's Auto Inn, and as soon as I started there, and even the beginning when I was playing at the Irish Club at the hotel, I used to have to pick up this guy. His name was John Shea, and he loved Irish music, but he didn't have a car. And so he wanted to come. And so all these times, he'd say, "Hey, where are you going to play tonight?" And I tell him, he'd say, "Could you pick me up?" I said, "Sure." So after a while, I'd say, "Hey, I'm going to play tonight. You want to come?" He'd say, "Yeah." And so I had him coming all the time. And so what he would do is he would sit in some of the booths that were in Sullivan's, and there was about 4 on each side. And there was occasionally there were opens, but he'd just go and sit there and have his beer. And so then one time while he was playing, all of a sudden, a couple of girls came in and sat there. And so then one of them went up to the bar and was buying beer, 2 or 3 beers to bring back to their table. And when she did, she started talking to John. And then the first thing you know, he comes into I bring him to the Sullivan's Auto Inn, and he'd disappear for a while. And then the first thing you know, he's there, and he's got a girlfriend.
He would have been great at the shower.
Oh, God, the showers were terrible. Yeah. And so all of a sudden, then one time, so he went over and he used to come, when she'd come in, he'd go over and sit there, and he'd sit there the whole night with the girl, and they'd be talking back and forth. And they never got drunk, you know. And so then all of a sudden, one night, the girl came in, and she had a companion. And she was a redhead that she brought in. And so I looked, I said, oh, wow, look at that, a redhead, you know. And so she and Nellie were sitting in the thing with John. And as soon as I had a break, I'd go over and I'd sit with them.
Oh,
and so we had been sitting together like this during the breaks and everything. And then, like I say, every once in a while she'd get up and dance, because there were a lot of people, a lot of guys there that knew me, you know. And so they'd go over and ask her to dance. And they'd say, we know Pat. And so she'd
so
dance.
I can dance with you.
Yeah. And so anyhow, all of a sudden I'm sitting there and John's sitting there, and John says, hey, Nellie, how about we go to the movies on Sunday night? And she said, oh, I'd love to. And he'd say, hey, Pat, you take Mary. And so then Mary says, he'll have to ask me first.
Oh, I like her, a little feisty.
Yeah. And so I said, oh, would you like to go to the movies? And she said, oh, I'd love to. So that's the way it started. Yep.
Oh.
Yep. And several years after that, we got married. Yep.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yep.
nice.
Yep.
Nice.
And you know,
Yeah.
she was a true redhead. And when her hair started to change color, it changed into silver. It didn't change into white. It changed into silver. And she had this one, we were married and we were living up on Hungry Hill for a while. And then I said, you know, we need a house of our own. So I bought a lot in 16 acres and had it excavated. And I put in a foundation and everything. And I built a house there. And
You
then
built a house.
I built a house.
Of course.
Yep. And where I was very lucky was that at the fire station, we had a night keeper. And, you know, and at night, when we'd go out at night, he'd come down and he'd close the doors, because we'd drive out and leave the doors open. And he'd go down and close the doors. And then a lot of times he could hear us coming back in, and he'd run down and open up the doors again, and so we could back in. And he was a mason. And so I says, I'm building a house and I'm putting in a foundation. Can you give me a hand? He said, sure. God, he says, I'm always looking for a little work here and there. And we'd work for like half a day putting in the foundation. And then I'd take him over and we'd have supper in one of the restaurants that were around there. And he said, just for the supper, I'll finish the foundation for you.
We'll work for food.
Wow.
Excellent.
Yep. And so every time I picked him up and brought him out to the house and he started working, we built the foundation. Yep.
That is wonderful.
Yep. And that was how most of the house was built. And then, of course, I needed lumber. And so while I was buying the lumber, I was buying it from a Boilard. And I got all the lumber and everything. And then I just kept working along. And a lot of times my father would come and help me. And then my brother Tommy would come and help me. So bit by bit, it took me like a year and a half. And I finally got the house built. And so
It was literally in your free time.
Yeah, yes,
Wow.
yeah. Because as when I first joined, I was working like 70 hours a week in the fire station. Because what they were doing was they actually weren't like counting the nights, because we all had bedrooms.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so finally, like I say, we just work and work and work, and when I was off and everything, finally the house was built and we moved in, and by then we had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls.
Very nice.
Yep, we got the 2 boys first, and then we got the 2 girls. Yep,
Nice.
and that's where we were.
Oh, Patrick.
Yep,
That is just wonderful to hear
Yep.
about your start here
yeah,
in Western Massachusetts.
yes, yep. And so then, like I say, so we went on along there for quite a while, and then my father had a 4-wheel drive Jeep, and he has he made like a bed, and it was like a covered wagon. He was a tailor, so he got some pipe, and he just made a like this, and on the top of the Jeep, and then he put a mattress in it, and he used to go down to the beach fishing, and it was a Jeep, so he could ride down the beach. And so I said, "Oh my God," And so I went with him.
First camper.
Yeah, it was a camper, and you had a little ladder, and we'd climb up the ladder, and we'd sleep in the mattress on top of the Jeep. And I said, "This is great." So then we would go down the beach, and when we went down the beach, there was always a cut through from the backwater where all people had the smaller boats, and they'd come out and they'd go through this cutwater. And so I looked on the other side, and when I was there with my father in the Jeep, and there were a lot of big trucks that were there. And I said to some of the other guys that were around there that had 4-wheel drive trucks, and I said, "Well, how come those guys can't come out here?" And he said, "Well, you can't because you've got to have big tires or you got to have 4-wheel drive." And so I said, "Oh, wow." So then I was looking around and I saw this truck, and I said, "Oh my God," And I parked there, and I went over and I was looking at the truck, and it was for sale in a lot there with a bunch of other things, the other trucks. And so I saw this truck, and God, it had nice doors, and you could slide them and walk in, and then it was high enough so you could walk around in there. I said, "Oh God, a camper."
Yeah.
And so I made a camper.
Of course you did.
Yeah.
You made a camper.
And so I got the everything. First, I got a refrigerator, and then I knew a guy on the gas company, because a couple of times I've been places where there's been a problem with the gas, and some of these gas guys come, and it seemed like we had this one guy 2 or 3 times because he had that area. And I was talking to him, and I said, "Hey, I got a camper, and I want to put a refrigerator in it, but I can't because I don't have the electricity." I said, "Can you run that on propane gas?" And he said, "Oh, sure." He says, "You get it, and I'll adapt it." So I bought the refrigerator. And I had bought the truck, and I put the refrigerator in. Then I started building the rest of the inside of the truck. And so I finally had the whole thing finished. I had where we had the seats and the table for eating and everything. And I had a little place here where I had a gas stove and everything, and that ran on propane. And so then when at night coming, we could take the table and disassemble it and put it around here, and we would have a bed. And the cushions that we sat on, we put in, and we had a bed. And so then I needed some more beds for the boys. And so what I did was I put in two racks that went down the sides in, and then I had bars that went across. They were tubing bars, and they were made with electricians would use them. They're the smaller tubes for running pipes, from running wires through. And I would make those. And then I got Navy bunks the piece of canvas with all the holes around, and then just got rope, and I put it there, and they made two canvas beds up on top. And we would break the kitchen set down. My wife would go in. The girls would be on one side of her legs, and the other girl on the other side of her legs. And the two boys would be. They could climb up onto them, and they climb up onto them, and then over to the second one. And the two boys were there. And then I had an air mattress, and I slept on the floor. And we used to go camping. And then
I would have loved to see this thing driving down the road, you know?
Oh, that's
I mean, you know,
amazing.
it's like, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Patrick,
then.
if you would do me a huge favor and make a note where we are now, because we have come to the end of our time today.
Oh my God!
And we're going to have to bring you back.
Yeah, we're going to have you. Right, exactly.
But
yeah.
I want you to make a note because I
want to
don't
hear
wanna
about
lose
the
us.
Okay,
right,
well,
yeah.
And
about the fire department
and
years.
the fire department.
you know,
and
yeah.
recent
Oh yeah, I haven't
audits.
got to the fire department
We
yet.
have a
Yeah.
ton to cover.
Yes.
Yeah,
But we're
yeah.
out of time today.
Right. Okay.
It has been such a delight to have you with us. I have goosebumps.
Yeah,
hearing
yeah.
about
No, we have to do a
your
part
travels.
two.
So
Yeah,
we must do a
absolutely.
part two.
Yep.
So
Okay.
would you come back? Mr.
Okay,
Keough?
sure.
Okay,
So
all
let's
right,
see.
great.
Where are we now?
All right,
We're
so
in the camper.
In the
Right,
camper.
right,
We
we're
just
at the
I
camper,
just built
but
the
the
camper.
boys-
you know,
Now
that
sleep.
we should probably, because I mean, I know that people would probably want to hear about the fire department years and
it is
everything
so-
like that.
96 years?
96 years, you know, and so your 40 years of
Story.
your life was there too. So anyway, so thank you, Mr. Keough. Yeah,
Oh.
so we will have you back again. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
perfect.
No,
Very
this is
well booked
great. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, so that wraps up another episode of Stories from the View. We'd like to thank Pat Keough for being here today. The Stories from the View podcast is available on the LCAT 01028 channel on YouTube. And if you have a story you'd like to share on the program, contact Pleasant View Senior Center Director Aaron Kobler by stopping by the Pleasant View Senior Center. You can call Aaron at 413-525-5436, extension 1401, or send her an email, aaron.kobler@eastlongmeadowma.gov. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time on Stories from the View. Very nice.
Nice job. Oh, that was